a massive wooden vessel, smelling of hot pitch and wet timber, built exactly 50 cubits wide to survive the end of the world. And the exact moments when people walk free, you begin to see a divine architecture that the simple counting theory completely misses. The gold clasps catch the harsh desert light. The workers slide the heavy gold hooks through the blue threads. They pull the massive sheets of fabric tight. The pieces interlock. The tension holds. The tent becomes one single, unified tabernacle. Blue is the color of the heavens. Gold is the metal of kings. But the number 50 is what actually makes the connection work. This is not just ancient tailoring. This is a theological statement woven into fabric. The 50 loops are not just a structural necessity. They are a physical picture of reconciliation. Without the 50 loops, you have scattered pieces of cloth blowing across the desert dirt, a divided house, an open roof. With the 50 loops, the gap is closed, the breach is healed. You have a unified structure capable of holding the fire of God. 50 binds the broken halves together. 50 connects the pieces. 50 is the exact joint where human division is overcome by divine unity. The number of grace is literally holding the sanctuary together in the wilderness. But this mathematical pattern was never meant to be confined to a piece of woven linen. It was not just meant to be sewn into a tent. It was meant to be blasted through the air. 50 is not the number of a long wait. It is the threshold of absolute release. The question is why? The legal codes of the ancient Near East were built entirely on the concept of permanence. If you went into debt and lost your family farm, your grandchildren would be born landless. If you could not pay your creditors, you sold your own body into servitude, and you died a slave. The system was a closed loop of generational poverty. And then you open the book of Leviticus. In Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10, God gives Israel a command that completely shatters the economic logic of the ancient world. He tells them to count 7 cycles of 7 years, 49 years of planting, harvesting, owing, and accumulating. And then he institutes the 50th year. The text says, "And you shall consecrate the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you." The word your English Bible translates as jubilee is the Hebrew yobel. It does not mean a festival. It does not mean a golden anniversary celebration. The primary meaning of yobel is a ram's horn. It is the shofar. It is the curved, hollow bone instrument that produces a sharp, piercing wail capable of carrying across miles of rocky valleys. On the Day of Atonement, in the 50th year, that specific horn was blown to signal a complete, nationwide reset. And the word translated as liberty in that same verse is the Hebrew deror. This is not an abstract political concept of freedom, and the answer changes how you read everything, from the floodwaters of Genesis to the fire of the early church. Deror carries the root idea of fluid, unimpeded movement. It is the way a swallow flies freely through the open air, or the way a river runs completely unhindered over smooth stones. It means taking a human being who has been bound, trapped, or weighed down by an immovable burden, and releasing them to move freely again. That changes everything about how we understand this number. When the yobel sounded, the heavy iron chains of debt literally hit the dust. If you had lost your grandfather's land to a wealthy landowner, the deed was returned directly to your hands. If you had sold yourself into servitude to survive a bitter famine, you packed up your things and walked right out the door. The slate was completely zeroed out. The Jubilee is not a primitive economic policy. It is a violent interruption of human consequence. It was God explicitly stating that He would not allow human beings to be permanently defined by their debts, their failures, or their poverty. The absolute limit of human accumulation was 49. On the 50th beat, the system was forced to release its captives. For centuries, Israel struggled to actually observe this radical rhythm. The temptation to hold on to power, property, and control was always too strong. The pattern remained largely unfulfilled, a promise locked inside the text, waiting for a true release. But a law written on parchment is one thing. We live in a world defined by accumulation. You accumulate financial debt. You accumulate relational mistakes. What happens when the exact same pattern of the 50th beat steps completely out of the ancient agrarian calendar and crashes violently into a first-century room in Jerusalem? A stone room in Jerusalem. The air is thick and still. 120 people sit on the hard dirt floor, waiting in the silence. The blood of the Passover lamb dried on a Roman cross exactly 50 days ago. The stone was rolled back from the tomb. The resurrected rabbi ascended into the clouds. And now, they wait. Acts chapter 2. Verse 1 sets the scene. The followers are huddled together, in obedience to a command they barely understand. The text reads, "When the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place." The word your English Bible uses here is the Greek Pentecoste. Modern readers treat that word like a religious title. We use it like a denominational label or a theological brand. But in the first century, it is not a proper noun at all. The word literally just means 50th. It is the Greek name for the ancient Jewish Feast of Weeks, a festival mathematically mandated to occur exactly 50 days after the Passover Sabbath. You count 7 cycles of 7 days, 49 days of cutting the barley, bringing the grain, working the harvest. That mathematical translation changes everything. You accumulate days and regrets and obligations. And the default human assumption is that you simply have to carry that weight until you break. When the sky breaks open in the book of Acts, it is not on a random Tuesday. Jesus did not just choose an arbitrary afternoon to send his Spirit. He waited for the exact numerical threshold of the Jubilee. The 50th beat drops. It does not come with a quiet, polite whisper. It comes with violence. A sound like a rushing, mighty wind tears through the closed architecture. There is no storm outside, no meteorological source, but the roar is deafening. It vibrates in their chests. It rattles the heavy wooden doors. Then, the visual breaks into the physical space. Tongues of fire appear, radiating intense heat and brilliant light. Yet they do not scorch the ceiling, and they do not burn the skin. The flame rests over the head of every single person in the room. The 50 cubits of gopher wood held back the floodwaters. The 50 loops of blue bound the divided sanctuary together. The slaves remained in chains until the 50th year sounded the ram's horn. And humanity remained entirely separated from the internal presence of God until the 50th day. Pentecost is not the invention of a new religion. It is the cosmic execution of the ancient release. God is taking the math of the Yobel, the shofar of the Jubilee, and applying it directly to the human soul. The disciples stumble out. You pay what you owe. You serve your time. You fix what you broke. But the authors of the scriptures keep dropping this specific number into the streets, speaking in languages they never learned. The heavy iron chains of spiritual exile are hitting the cobblestones. The ancient curse of Babel is running in reverse. The system is completely resetting. The 50th day is the absolute end of the closed loop of human failure. But here is what most people miss about the freedom that was actually unleashed in that upper room. To feel the weight of the chains hitting the floor, you first have to realize how deep your own ledger actually goes. We live in a culture that meticulously tracks every single deficit. You check a glowing glass screen in the dark, and a precise numerical value tells you exactly what you owe the bank. You stare at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, and your mind obsessively itemizes the social and relational debts you have accumulated over decades. You broke a promise. You missed a vital moment. You failed to measure up to an expectation. Your exhaustion is not a sign of physical weakness. It is the physical manifestation of a phantom debt. You are carrying a ledger in your chest, and your jaw is permanently tight from the weight of it. The natural human impulse, the default setting of our entire species, is to try and pay it off. We wake up early to work harder, like a hammer against that assumption. They do not use it to measure time. They use it to measure mercy. We apologize profusely. We try to be more generous, more disciplined, more perfect. We assume that if we just reach the 49th step of self-improvement, the ledger will finally balance out. We assume the cosmic economy works exactly like a modern mortgage. You owe a pound of silver. You pay a pound of silver. Religious systems constantly exploit this instinct. They hand you a clipboard and tell you to track your moral progress. Read this many chapters. Pray this many hours. Put this much money in the plate. They tell you that if you just grind through the 49 cycles of religious performance, you will eventually earn the right to stand in the presence of God. That is not the gospel. That is ancient Babylonian debt slavery, dressed up in modern theology. If you are in a season where you feel completely weighed down by the sheer volume of what you owe to your past, to your family, to your own impossible standards, you are standing exactly where the ancient Israelites stood, before the ram's horn sounded. You are exhausted because you are trying to manufacture your own jubilee. You are trying to bridge the gap with your own thread. You cannot build an ark big enough to survive the flood of your own failures. You cannot weave enough blue linen to stitch your fractured relationships back together. You can only work for 6 days. They use 50 to mark the exact boundary line where the math of human effort reaches its absolute limit. You can only count to 49. When the ancient agrarian worker reached the 49th year, he did not work twice as hard. In the 50th, to buy his land back. He stopped. He stood in the dry dust of his poverty, and he listened for the sound of a horn he did not blow, announcing a release he did not earn. But how does that ancient economic release actually translate into the cosmic courtroom? Because a holy God does not just wave a hand and pretend the debt never existed. The ledger is absolutely real. The debt is precisely documented. The creator of the universe is infinite in his justice. He does not ignore the deficit. He does not sweep the broken laws under a cosmic rug. The accounts must balance. The wages of rebellion must be paid. The scales must be leveled. But here is what most people miss about the ancient pattern of release. The 50th year did not just start on a random morning. The ram's horn did not blow on just any Tuesday in the spring. Leviticus chapter 25 is incredibly specific. The Jubilee was triggered exactly on the Day of Atonement. It starts with blood. A priest slaughters a goat. Blood splashes against the cold gold of the mercy seat. A second goat is driven out into the empty, burning wilderness. And something entirely outside the system has to break in. It is the number of the system resetting. The payment is made first. The release comes second. Atonement is the engine that actually drives the Jubilee. Without the blood, the horn does not blow. Without the sacrifice, the slaves stay in chains. Without the cost being entirely absorbed, the land does not return to its original owner. Fast forward to the 1st century. An iron spike is driven through human bone. A heavy wooden beam is raised into the darkened sky. A Roman spear tears violently into a side, spilling water and blood into the dry dust. The ultimate Day of Atonement finishes its brutal, terrifying work. The debt of the entire human race is legally, permanently absorbed by the Creator himself. The cross is the payment. The empty tomb is the clearance, but Pentecost is the receipt. When the violent wind shakes that stone room 50 days later, it is not an arbitrary miracle. It is the divine signature hitting the parchment. It is the cosmic decree that the account is completely, officially settled. The Spirit of God does not descend on a people who are still in debt. The fire does not fall on a house that is still condemned. He descends on a people who have been entirely bought back. The 50 days were not a random delay. They were the mathematical proof of a cleared ledger. The Jubilee was no longer just a calendar year for an ancient nation. It is the sound of the chains hitting the stone floor. But in the biblical imagination, 50 is never just 50. It became a permanent, irreversible reality in the human soul. The prison doors are already open. The iron chains are already lying on the stone floor. The only question left is what you are going to do with your freedom. The floodwaters rise to wipe out a violent earth, and exactly 50 cubits of gopher wood carry the remnant to a completely new creation. A patriarch, bargains for a doomed, burning valley, and exactly 50 souls become the ultimate threshold of divine amnesty. A nation of runaway slaves builds a divided tent in the burning sand, and exactly 50 loops of blue thread bind the fractured halves into one holy sanctuary. A crushing cycle of generational poverty reaches its absolute limit, and the 50th year sounds a ram's horn that drops every iron chain in the dirt. The blood of the ultimate sacrifice is spilled to cover a cosmic deficit, and the payment triggers a permanent, irreversible pardon. A terrified remnant waits in a silent stone room in Jerusalem, and the 50th day tears the sky open with rushing wind and falling fire. The math of human perfection exhausts itself at 49, and the 50th beat shatters the closed loop of consequence forever. Same number, same release. But maybe the part that stays with me most is that ancient ram's horn, 50 loops of blue thread, spoon by hand, binding the inner curtains of God's dwelling place in the burning heat of the Sinai desert. It is not an arbitrary choice. It is a calculation. It is a formula woven into the bedrock of creation itself, the Yobel. Not a golden trumpet blown by a king in a pristine palace, but a rough, hollow bone blown in the dust of a broken field, a sound that did not demand the captives to work harder, a sound that simply announced that the work was already finished. The debt was zeroed out before they even took their first step of freedom. If you are in a season where the weight of your own ledger feels unbearable, if you are exhausted from trying to pay off a phantom debt of regret, or failure, or missed expectations, you do not need to grind out another cycle of 49. You do not need to manufacture your own rescue. The 50th beat has already sounded over your life, and may the God who has never once let human failure have the final word walk into the closed loops of your life, sound the horn of release, and bring you out carrying a freedom you could not have earned any other way, hiding in plain sight in the way the ancient Hebrews were instructed to observe the turning of the earth. Before you can understand the survival of the ark, or the design of the tabernacle, or the explosion of Pentecost, you have to understand the math. You have to see what happens when human completion runs out of numbers. In the Hebrew worldview, numbers are not just symbols on a parchment. They are architecture. They have mass. They carry physical weight. The number 7 is the anchor of this architecture. It means completion. It means wholeness. 7 days make a week. 7 years make an agricultural cycle. You work for 6 days. The sweat runs down your neck. The dry dust of the field coats your skin. The calluses on your hands grow thick and hard. Then comes the 7th day. You stop. You breathe. You rest. 7 is the rhythm of a created, ordered world. But what happens when you multiply completion by itself? You take 7, you multiply it by 7. 7 cycles of 7 days. 7 cycles of 7 years. The math brings you to 49. A curved ram's horn echoing through the autumn air on the 50th year. Its sound literally shattering every legal debt record in an ancient nation. 49 is the ultimate expression of human perfection. It is the absolute maximum limit of what humanity can build, count, or accomplish on its own. You plant the seeds. You wait for the rain. You swing the heavy iron sickle until your arms go numb. You store the golden wheat in the stone barns. You do it perfectly. You count the days flawlessly. You reach 49, but 49 is a closed loop. It is a locked door, because human perfection is never enough to save you. Human completion always leaves a gap. Human effort, no matter how precise, eventually runs out of breath. The debts still pile up. The body still breaks down. God does not leave the biblical narrative at 49. He adds one. He takes the absolute peak of human striving, and he steps right over the boundary line. 49 plus 1. 50. 50 is not the continuation of the human cycle. It is the invasion of divine grace. It is what happens when you have done absolutely everything you can, when your hands are empty, and God steps in to do the one thing you cannot. The 50th beat is the system reset. It breaks the math of karma. It shatters the closed loop of consequence. Count 7 weeks of days. 49 days of grinding wheat and waiting. But it is the 50th day that rips the sky open, 50 days after the blood of a lamb dries on a Roman cross. A violent wind tears through a stone room in Jerusalem. Count 7 weeks of years. 49 years of losing land, of serving masters, of accumulating heavy silver debts. But it is the 50th year that opens the prison doors. The pattern is relentless. Humanity works to the edge of its capacity. We reach the end of our rope. We hit the wall of 49, and then the 50th beat drops. It is the number of the impossible rescue. It is the exact measurement of grace breaking into a doomed space. And the very first time we see this specific measurement applied to salvation in the text, it is not a date on a calendar. It is not a theological concept. It is a physical structure. It is made of gopher wood. It is sealed with black pitch. And it is built to survive the end of the world. The heavy bronze adze strikes the ancient gopher wood, sending pale, splintered chips flying into the dry dirt. You can smell the boiling pitch long before you see it, a thick, black resin bubbling slowly in massive clay pots, waiting to be smeared across every joint and seam of the timber. Noah is not building a ship, and fire falls on a group of terrified fishermen. Same number, same threshold. Again and again, he is building an ark, a teba in Hebrew, which is literally a massive wooden lifebox with no sail, no rudder, and no helm. He is constructing an architecture of pure surrender, a vessel designed solely to be sealed from the outside and tossed upon the most violent, terrifying waters the earth will ever endure. And the dimensions handed down from the divine architect in Genesis chapter 6 are obsessively precise. 300 cubits long, 30 cubits high, and exactly 50 cubits wide. If you study naval architecture, you quickly learn that the width of a vessel is the absolute determining factor in its center of gravity. The beam dictates whether a ship will hold its ground or roll over completely when a chaotic, overwhelming surge strikes its broadside. The width of a vessel is its ultimate margin of survival in the dark. When the sky finally fractures and the subterranean reservoirs burst violently upward, the deafening roar of the water drowns out everything else. Inside that dark, pitch-sealed hull, surrounded by the terrifying sounds of timber groaning under immeasurable pressure, the remnant of humanity hangs by a fragile thread. But the vessel does not capsize. It holds the line between total annihilation and a completely new creation. The 50 cubits are not a random dimension chosen by a pragmatic boat builder. They are the exact mathematical width of mercy. Most people assume the number 50 in the biblical text is just a mathematical placeholder, a half-century marker. 50 is the physical capacity of salvation, the precise space required to carry human life through the threshold of certain death and deliver it safely onto a dry mountain peak. The human race is brought to the absolute limit of destruction, facing a judgment that is entirely deserved. And yet a family is carried across the abyss, inside a wooden structure measured by the number of grace. The math of human failure reached its terrible climax, but the 50th unit held back the chaos. The floodwaters eventually recede, leaving the ark resting silently on the jagged rocks of Ararat. But this specific measurement of mercy is not confined to the physical dimensions of floating timber. Centuries later, another man stands on a dusty ridge, overlooking a doomed valley, and he decides to use the exact same number to negotiate with the creator of the universe. We constantly try to bargain with the divine. It is human nature to bring our own metrics of justice to the table, hoping our good behavior will somehow outweigh our quiet failures. We assume the cosmic ledger is a sliding scale of percentages and probabilities. But when you analyze Genesis chapter 18, you are not just reading an ancient historical record of a patriarch bargaining in the desert. You are looking at the legal foundation of divine mercy. Abraham stands on a high, rocky ridge, a convenient, round figure used by ancient scribes for counting soldiers in a wilderness census or measuring the dimensions of a temple courtyard. He can feel the dry heat radiating off the canyon walls from the Jordan Valley below. He is looking down at Sodom and Gomorrah, cities that have completely maxed out the human capacity for cruelty and exploitation. The judgment is already in motion. The sulfur is already waiting to drop, and Abraham steps in front of God to negotiate a pardon. He asks if the righteous will be swept away with the wicked, and then he sets his anchor. He does not start his negotiation at 100. He does not pull a random figure out of the thin air. He chooses the exact number that represents the boundary line of release. What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? To the modern, Western mind, this just looks like a man haggling over a price in an ancient bazaar. It is not a random starting bid. It is the request for a complete system reset. Abraham is invoking the math of grace. He is asking the Creator if the presence of 50 can trigger a blanket amnesty over a valley drowning in its own violence. If seeing these hidden architectural patterns in the text is shifting the way you read your Bible, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we dig past the English translation to find the blueprint underneath. And in the ancient world, it often functioned exactly like that. But if you look closer, so God answers the patriarch's question. God agrees to the math. He says, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." This is a massive theological revelation, hiding in a simple conversation. In human economics, a debt must be paid 1 to 1. You owe a pound of silver. You pay a pound of silver. But in the architecture of biblical mercy, the 50th beat is disproportionate. The 50 covers the thousands. The threshold of grace is designed to completely absorb the deficit of the entire population, rewriting the ledger from the ground up. Sodom, tragically, does not even hold 10 righteous men. The heavy, choking stench of sulfur eventually fills the valley. But the legal precedent of the number was permanently established on that ridge. The metric of amnesty was officially recorded. And a few hundred years later, God commands a nation of runaway slaves to take that exact same number and weave it directly into the fabric of his sanctuary. The Sinai desert burns beneath a white sun. The wind throws sharp sand against the skin. At the base of a smoking mountain, a nation of former slaves is building a house for God. They spin the linen. They dye the threads. They beat the gold. Exodus, chapter 26, lays out the exact blueprint for the tabernacle. If you look at the specific narrative weight attached to this number at the structures that are built, the elements that are bound together, it is a mobile sanctuary. It is a tent designed to house the glory of the Creator. The instructions are relentless. The measurements are absolute. 10 inner curtains of fine twined linen. They are dyed in blue. They are dyed in purple. They are dyed in scarlet. The smell of crushed indigo snails and rare dyes hangs in the dry air. The calluses on the weaver's hands grow thick. The vats of color stain their fingers. They weave figures of cherubim directly into the heavy fabric. But the curtains are separate. They are individual pieces of cloth. 5 curtains are sewn into one massive sheet. The other 5 curtains are sewn into a second massive sheet. 2 halves, a deep division in the middle, to form a single dwelling place. They must be perfectly united. They must bridge the gap. Moses receives the exact engineering spec to bring the 2 halves together. Make loops of blue thread along the edge of the first sheet. Make loops of blue thread along the edge of the second sheet. How many loops? Exactly 50. 50 blue loops on one side. 50 blue loops on the other. Then, the craftsmen beat raw gold into 50 solid clasps.